Hey y'all, I'm Hope. Welcome back to my channel. Today we're taking a look at some anticipated releases for the first quarter of 2024. I don't have quite a long list as I would normally have at this point of the year. I think it's mostly because I'm not active on Twitter anymore. I used to get a lot of information on upcoming releases via Twitter, but it just kind of makes me angry now. It's kind of falling apart under Elon Musk and I don't enjoy being on Twitter anymore. So I've kind of lost that source of information, but I do have a decent list of things that I'm very excited for that are coming in the first few months of next year. First up, on January 23rd, we're getting The Mysterious Case of the Alperton Angels by Janice Hallett, which is one of my most anticipated books for next year. This is a mixed media mystery about a true crime writer who's trying to track down a child. There was a cult many years ago who convinced the child's mother that the child was the Antichrist, but by the time the mother realized something was wrong and called the police, it was too late and the cult committed suicide and the mother and the child both disappeared. So now this true crime writer is trying to track her down to try and interview the child, who should be 18 at this point, and they want to interview him to revamp their career, basically. But they end up having to work with their rival, another true crime writer, and as they're both kind of collaborating and investigating this, peeling back all the layers, they realize the situation is much darker than they originally thought. I'm very excited for this. I love a mixed media mystery, and I really enjoyed Janice Hallett's first book, The Appeal, but that one was all emails, and then her second book is all audio transcripts, so I'm really interested to see what she's going to do with a full-length book of like a variety of different kinds of documents. Then also on January 23rd, we're getting The Clinic by Kate Quinn, which is a thriller about a woman, I believe her name is Mary, might be wrong on that, but she has a bit of a drug addiction, but she's also working at a casino in LA when she starts to hear rumors that her sister has recently passed away in a rehab facility in a remote area, and her sister was a famous actress who also had some addiction issues. And so she goes to that rehab facility and checks herself in as a patient because she doesn't believe the rumors that her sister committed suicide. I think it sounds like it's going to be a lot of fun, and I feel like it's a premise I've heard before, or like a similar versions of it, but I don't think I've read any books with this kind of a premise, so I'm really excited to dive in and see what I think of it. Editing Hope here. I almost forgot to mention another book that comes out on February 6th. This one is The Tainted Cup by Robert Jackson Bennett, which is a Sherlock Holmes inspired or esque fantasy story about a man who dies abruptly when a tree erupts from his body, and a Sherlock Holmes type detective figure who solves mysteries without ever leaving her home. She also, I believe, always has her eyes covered, and the story is told from the perspective of her kind of Watson-like sidekick. Sounds super interesting. I'm really excited for this one. I also have an ARC for this, and I'm amazed that I managed to forget it given that I have the ARC and I've been really looking forward to reading it. So just want to make sure I included that on this list because I think sounds like it's going to be a really fun fantasy mystery, and I'm hoping a lot of people will check it out. Next up, on February 13th, we're getting An Education in Malice by S.T. Gibson. I don't know much about this one, but I'm pretty sure it's a Carmilla retelling, so I think it's going to be really interesting. I know a lot of people love S.T. Gibson's writing. I haven't read A Dowry of Blood yet, but it is on my shelf, and it's one that I'm really excited to get to, so I think this one sounds really interesting, and at some point I think what I want to do is read Dracula and Carmilla, and then have the context so I can read her, her versions of Dracula and Carmilla. But this one sounds like it's going to be really interesting, and I know a lot of people will be very excited about this one. Another book coming out on February 13th is What Feasts at Night by T. Kingfisher. I don't actually remember the plot of this one. I just know it's the next book in the Sworn Soldier series following Alex from the What Moves the Dead. That was originally a Edgar Allan Poe retelling. I don't know if this book's a retelling of anything, but it's just another horror novella with the same character, and I really enjoyed the first one, so I'm excited to read this one as well. Last one that's also on February 13th is The Warm Hands of Ghosts by Catherine Arden, which is a World War I book that I think has some possible speculative elements, but it's about a woman who is a nurse, and she gets injured and is sent home from the front lines. So she's back in Canada while her brother is still in Flanders, and then she starts to hear that possibly he's died on the battlefield, but then there's evidence that maybe that's not true, and so she returns by signing up as a nurse at a private facility and trying to kind of figure out what's going on, where her brother is, whether he actually died on the battlefield or whether he maybe escaped in some way, and whether something has happened to him since then. I believe it's also possible that it's multi-perspective. I think maybe the brother is also a POV in the book. So I think this one sounds interesting, and I really liked Catherine Arden's middle grade series. I didn't really like the Winter Night trilogy. I didn't read much of it. I started the first book and ended up DNFing it, but I really liked her middle grade Small Spaces series, so I am interested to read something adult from her. Then on February 20th, Also, I just want to caveat, because I don't remember if this is actually a Tuesday. That one is a Tuesday. I have one that has a date that's not a Tuesday. So for some of these, this is just the date that I pulled off of Goodreads. I just want to give that a heads up on that, because I think there's one or two of these that have a date that might actually be the UK publication date, and I just haven't been able to find anything for the US yet. But back to what I was saying, on February 20th, we're getting A Tempest of Tea by Hafsa Faizal, which is the beginning of a new fantasy duology, I believe. I can't remember if this is YA or adult, but it's following Arthie Casimir, who runs a tea house by day and a blood... what's the word for it? What's the word in the thing? Blood house, I think, at night. Basically a kind of tea room sort of thing that caters to vampires. But then circumstances happen, I don't remember what, but Arthie has to get involved in a heist that involves vampires. Sounds super fun. I've been kind of looking forward to this one since Hafsa Faizal first announced it, and I think it's just going to be like a really fun story, so I'm excited. Next up on February 24th, and this is one of the ones where I'm like, that's not a Tuesday, so I'm not really sure what the actual date is, but that's currently what's listed on Goodreads. But that's The Book of Ilvrienne by Martha Wells, which is a republication of the first two books in a fantasy series that she wrote, I think, beginning in like the early 90s. So I can't remember which two books are in it, but it's like a bind-up of those. Next up is A Dark and Drowning Tide by Alison Saft, which is coming out on March 5th. And that one is a sapphic YA fantasy, I think, or possibly adult fantasy, I can't remember. But this one is a sapphic fantasy involving a folklorist and their academic rival who end up working together to solve a mentor's murder. Love a good murder mystery, love anything kind of fantasy, especially a fantasy murder mystery. That's exactly my cup of tea, so I'm very excited for this one. And I've heard good things about the author's previous books, although I haven't read anything from Alison Saft yet. Next up, just to mention briefly, on the 12th, we're getting the second book in the Empire of the Vampire series. I'm still reading book 1. I'm not sure yet if I'm actually going to pick up book 2, but I wanted to put that on there for anybody who did enjoy book 1 and wanted to read the next one. Then on March 19th, we're getting The Woods All Black by Lee Mandello, which is a 1920s historical horror set in Appalachia about a trans man who is a nurse. He moves to small town Appalachia after serving in the First World War and gets involved in a situation where the community is starting to turn against a young person who they describe as being an unruly tomboy, but who may also be gender nonconforming. And I think it sounds like it's going to be really intense and really impactful. And I've heard good things about Lee Mandello's previous books, so I think this one sounds fantastic. I really like kind of gothic stories set in Appalachia or set in the South, and I'm just so excited for this one. It sounds fantastic. Also, it's a novella, and I love a good novella, so I'm very excited for this one. I also still need to read Summer Suns by this author, but this one just in particular has caught my eye, and I think it's going to be so much fun. Also on March 19th, we're getting A Botanical Daughter by Noah Medlock, which is I think it's a historical fiction, a historical fantasy set in Victorian England, and it's following these two men who are in a relationship with each other, but they're kind of hiding it via, like, working in the same place. And they work in a botanical garden. One of them is a taxidermist who works in the basement, and then the other man is a botanist. And they end up kind of going a little bit Frankenstein and creating a daughter made of plants. I think specifically made of fungus. So I think it sounds really fun. Frankenstein's one of my all-time favorite books, and this is described as being for fans of Oscar Wilde and Mary Shelley. So those are two of my favorite authors. I think this is going to be really interesting, and I'm excited to pick it up. One more book on March 19th. We have The Mystery Writer by Sulari Gentile, which is a book about a attorney, I believe, Theo, who leaves her career and decides to become a writer. And then her mentor is murdered, and her brother becomes the prime suspect. And it sounds, based on the description, like maybe she goes down for it to protect him. And then I think the book is the brother investigating and trying to, like, kind of follow the threads, figure out what actually happened, and try to save his sister. So I think it sounds really good. I'm noticing there's a lot of murder mysteries on this list. I didn't really realize that until just now. But I know people had some mixed feelings about this author's previous book, which was The Woman in the Library, I think. But I haven't read that one. This one just sounds really interesting to me, and I like that it's probably like an amateur detective kind of a story. So I think this one sounds like a lot of fun. Then on March 26th, we're getting The Last Blood Carver by Vanessa Lay, which is a YA fantasy that's Vietnamese inspired, and it's following I think a teenage girl. Yes, so it's following this girl who is a blood carver, which is someone who can alter human biology with a single touch, but she gets found out, she gets captured and sold to an aristocratic family who want her to heal the last witness, I believe, to the patriarch's murder, and she gets involved in the investigation trying to figure out what's going on and who killed the patriarch. So again, fantasy murder mystery, sounds really fun. I'm also really intrigued by a kind of medical-based magic system. I think that sounds really cool, and I'm very excited to dive into this one. Also, the cover is gorgeous. Penultimate book I have here is also on March 26th. This is Diavola by Jennifer Thorne, which I believe is a book about, like, family gatherings. It's about a woman who goes to her family's, like, annual destination vacation, and she doesn't really enjoy this. It's always really a frustrating experience for her. But this one year, her and her family go to a remote villa, and strange things begin to happen. They're getting weird, ominous warnings from the locals, and the villa has a dark past. More gothic stuff. Sounds really fun. I have another book by this author on my shelf that I haven't read yet, but I just am curious to see what this is going to be about, because really the description's pretty vague, and I don't really have a sense of what the plot is, but I think it sounds like it could be an interesting exploration of family dynamics. Then finally, also on March 26th, we have The Angel of Indian Lake by Stephen Graham Jones, which is the final book in the Indian Lake trilogy. I haven't read the first book yet, so I don't know what this plot is because I'm trying not to spoil myself for books 1 and 2, but I'm very excited for this. I've been meaning to read book 1, and I'm hoping to read books 1 and 2 at the beginning of next year so I can be ready for Angel of Indian Lake when it comes out. This is a slasher trilogy following a girl named Jade, who is a horror movie buff, and in the first book, a series of events happens that lead her to believe that she might be living in a horror movie. So there's all of the anticipated releases I have on my list for the first 3 months, but let me know down in the comments if there's anything you're excited about that I don't have on this list, because I'm always looking to add to my anticipated releases list. And again, I didn't have a long list this go round because I don't have as much information coming in from different sources, so definitely let me know if there's anything I missed that you're really looking forward to in 2024. That's basically all I have for you today, so I really hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you have, I hope you'll consider giving it a like, maybe even subscribing to see what comes next. I'm currently posting every Tuesday and Saturday, so there is more content coming soon, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye.